Real-time yields analysis, part 3, accurately calculating yield variances. Accurate variances, the essentials. Know the expected weight of each subprimal relative to the yield grade and sex or type of carcass. Relate each subprimal moving through fab with a specific carcass. Calculate the actual weight associated with each subprimal as it moves through fab. And determine the variance of that individual subprimal to the expected weight for that subprimal coming from a specific carcass. This is an example of a single carcass. We're looking at a 109E at $13.50 per pound. The carcass we're looking at is an 850 pound yield grade 1 steer. The normal standard for this carcass as it went through fab would be about 37.57 pounds. The detailed standard that accounts for the fact that this is a yield grade 1 steer and not a yield grade 3 steer would be 38.68 pounds. If the actual weight as this subprimal went through fab was 37.11, the normal standard variance would show us about a half a pound of variance. The detailed standard variance would show us that it was actually 1.5 pounds. And the normal versus the detailed standard, we look at those variances, we're talking about over a pound that the detailed standard would track that the normal standard would not see. So we're talking about $15 of value that wouldn't be tracked by the normal standard versus the detailed standard. Okay, an example of production. We're looking again at 109Es, $13.50 per pound. These are the carcass IDs, the yield grades, the weight, and the type of carcass, steers, heifers, and Holsteins. We're looking at the weight part of the table here. And like in the case of carcass number 7, we see that it was actually fabbed at 33.02. The normal standard would have been 33.12. The detailed standard would have been 34.13 because this is a yield grade 1 steer, not a yield grade 3. And the normal variance would have showed at about 0.13, but the detailed variance would have showed 1.11 pounds. If we look at the total for these 10 carcasses coming through the line, we've got a variance of about 3 pounds looking at the normal variance, but when we look at the detailed variance, we actually see that the real variance at a detailed level is more than 3 times what the normal variance is. If we look at the dollars associated with these 10 carcasses, we can see that in case of carcass 1, we have about $1.75 is the normal variance, but in reality what we could have achieved when we measure it through the detailed variance is that there was $15 that we weren't able to capture through that particular subprimal. And if we look at the total dollars associated with these 10 carcasses, we've got a very negative variance against the standard variance, or the normal variance, of about $40. But if we look at the detailed variance, we actually are almost to $140. So we've got more than $3 times more variance than we did with the normal variance. If we look at carcass number 2, which is a yield grade 2 heifer carcass, heifers have a little bit different performance than steers. We see that the actual in this case was 33.12. The normal standard had been 33.15. But we actually should have had a detailed standard of about 34.05. That's what the real standard would be because this is a yield grade 2 heifer, not a yield grade 3 steer. When we look at the dollars actually associated with this, with a normal variance, we're only out by 41 cents, but the actual detailed variance, which accounts for the fact that we're talking about a yield grade 2 heifer, not a yield grade 3 steer, is almost $13. Okay, if we go ahead and take a look at those 10 carcasses and blow those out to 1,000 carcasses of production for the day, we're talking about 35,000 pounds roughly that would have been the actual fab. The normal standard would have said 35,360. But a detailed standard that accounts for these variations is going to say that we should have had over 36,000 pounds of product. So the normal variance would be almost 300 pounds, but the detailed variance would be over 1,000 pounds. If we look at the dollars associated with this one day of fab, we're talking about almost $4,000 negative variance for those 1,000 carcasses for that day against the normal standard. But the detailed standard is going to show a variance of almost $14,000. If we look at annual production of 250 days per year, then we're starting to talk about a normal variance in terms of pounds of maybe 73,000 pounds. But if we look at the detailed variance, we're talking about over 250,000 pounds of variance, a very large number. If we look at the dollars associated with this variance over the year, even for a normal variance, we're talking about $1,000. But if we look at the detailed variance, we're talking about we're talking about $1 million for the normal variance, and for the detailed variance, you're talking about $3.5 million. So that's a huge variance. And remember, that's just for this one specific subprimal. If that same thing occurs across all other subprimals, we could easily see $10 million of value that just isn't tracked because we're using normal standards versus detailed standards. Real-time yields analysis. Next video will be part 4, tracking yields in real time. For more information on real-time yields, contact NAV Analytics at 800-280-7107. Thank you.